Hello, and welcome to the Archives Month edition of Archives with Atkinson. I'm Megan Atkinson, and I'm here to talk to you today about preserving your paper materials at home. I recognize that everybody does not have all of the amenities and supplies that we have here in the archives, but at the same time, some of the things you can do at home on your own to make sure that your papers last longer and for future generations. To start, you can see I'm sitting here. I've got a number of things and tools in front of me. One of the most important, we have acid-free paper. This is used to protect pieces of paper that we are going to store from other pieces of paper or printed materials that may harm the papers that are around it. I have my 2HD pencil. If we do have to or need to write on any archival materials, we're going to want to do it in a very light pencil. We don't want it to leave an indent, and we want it to erase easily. We're not going to be writing on any of the materials we have here today, but if you need to clarify anything for your records for future family members, a pencil like this will help clarify if you can write a little note on what you have. We also have a micro spatula. This is a tool that we use in archives. It works very well for doing a lot of what we're going to be doing in the next couple of minutes, which is removing metal fasteners. And I'll get into that a little bit more. And I'll also have my plastic eraser. This eraser is not going to leave marks on your paper. It's soft, it's light. You're not going to end up smearing pencil lead all over your paper. I have a bamboo brush. I'm going to use this if anything has too much dirt on it that I don't want to store it with the dirt. I also have, this is a document eraser. This is something that we can get in an archival supplies store. For your purposes, this basic eraser will be great. And then I also have my acid-free folder, and this is where I'm going to store my materials. You at home may store your materials in regular folders or in a filing cabinet. The most important thing that you need to remember is that when you do store your materials, that you are storing them somewhere that does not receive a whole lot of sunlight and is relatively temperature and humidity controlled. So the bathroom, shed, attic, basement, these are all poor places to store your archival materials. If you're going to want to keep it a little bit cool, below 70 degrees, 60 would be ideal, and a low humidity, 40%. That is not something you're going to be able to get with your regular HVAC system in your home. However, not putting it somewhere that gets a whole lot of humidity is a great start to making sure that you maintain your materials for as long as possible. So this particular folder that I'm going to be putting these materials in, these materials were just dropped off to the archives the other day. And we can see a number of things here. There's the different types of paper material. First one is going to be this newspaper article. I have gone through here a little earlier and did interweave this a little bit with acid-free paper, and I removed some of the staples. However, there are a few in here, and I can show you what I'm going to do. One of the big things that we want to do in archives is we do not want to store them with fasteners. Rubber bands, after they've existed in your home or in an archive for a long time, some of them get dry and brittle. They're going to leave marks on your paper. Sometimes, I think if the temperature is too humid, they'll actually start to look like something like gum. So if you have these holding anything in your collection together, you're going to want to remove them and replace them with something else. Scotch tape. If you can take Scotch tape off safely, please remove it. It is going to damage your paper. It's going to cause discoloration. And of course, worst off, it could also just rip your paper. Paper clips. This is a lovely paperclip chain I've had made by one of my students. We have lots of paperclip chains because we do not typically leave paper clips in our archival collections because they have the tendency to rust. As a result of that, this is something among the many metal fasteners that we remove from our collection. Little plastic clips, these are exactly the same, and I say plastic clips, but we'll call these binder clips. These binder clips are also something that you are going to want to remove from your collection. And last but not least is staples, and these are the things that you're going to find probably the most of in your archival materials. And staples will also rust as they sit in your collection, especially if your materials aren't being stored properly. But we can prevent that by removing these staples from our documents and replacing them with things that are not as obtrusive to our collections. Binder clips are also something that we remove from our collections. They do have metal in them, and they do have a tendency to rust. They also have a tendency to damage your documents. This is really tight. It's going to create a bend and a press in your collection, and you're going to want to pull that out so that doesn't happen in the future. Paper clips are also something we remove from the collection. This is something that was put together by one of my students, and it's part of a much longer chain. We remove lots of paper clips, and much like the binder clips, these are going to leave marks, especially if your materials are not stored properly and have a lot more humidity. And then the last thing that we remove is going to be these staples. If these staples stay in, you are in danger of these materials becoming rusted if the temperature and humidity is not appropriate. So we can take these out and we can prevent that from happening to us in the future. And to take these out, and for you at home, you might need to find something a little bit different, another tool. Without damaging, I can say a pair of needle nose pliers may help you. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this on the back, and we're going to be very careful, and we're going to put this into the back of the staple, and we're going to pull the staple backs up on either side, and then we're going to remove it from the front as such. Now, so that we can make sure that we maintain the fact that these two pages belong together, what we're going to do is we're going to add a more friendly, preservation-friendly fastener. And in this case, this is a plastic clip. And you can replace the metal clip with the plastic clip in the corner. And this is no longer going to experience the rust that may happen if we left the staple in. And as we move forward, we can see, so when we get to this page, you can see that there is a metal fastener on here. However, the work that we did earlier, this metal fastener is actually from these gem paper clips, which are stainless steel. And the one good thing about these is they do stay on your documents a little bit better than plastic clips. If there's too many papers, I find that plastic clips generally tend to fall off. These are going to stay on a little bit better. You do have to be careful because they are a little bit tight, like the binder clip. So if you're worried about damaging your document, you can take a little bit of the acid-free paper, which I do recommend, and you can actually put it around the document as such. And you can add the metal fastener here, and that's going to prevent it from pinching your paper. You can see how that looks. It doesn't need to look pretty, it just needs to be functional. As we go through these papers, I mentioned the newspaper was in here. We also have an interesting type of copy paper that's in this as well. And you can see that I've interwoven this acid-free paper in between this copy paper and the other documents. And the reason that I did that is because this copy paper is a little more acidic than other types of papers, and I don't want it to touch those documents. The result that happens is something that looks like this when a more acidic paper touches another piece of paper. You can see this staining, and there's nothing that can really be done to get that out. But since we are at this document here in the back with the stain, it brings up another type of fastener. This particular document is a lot thicker, and I mentioned that these plastic clips as well as these stainless steel clips, they don't fit around this as well. Traditionally, if you were to put this in your office, you would put it with the binder clip because it is a lot of paper. However, since we're in archives, we're not going to put a binder clip on it, and instead we're going to come up with a different solution, and this solution is going to involve our acid-free paper. And all we're going to do to make sure that future people know that this material goes together is just slip this acid-free paper around this and then place it with the rest of our documents. So these documents, after being worked on about twice today, are mostly wrapped up, and probably the largest concern left in this particular collection is going to be this newspaper. Newspaper does not last long, and it will have a tendency to off-gas, meaning give off noxious fumes and damage some of the papers that are around it. If we left this newspaper here for a couple days, eventually this paper would have the same type of stain that was on that paper in the back that we just worked with. A couple things can be done with this newspaper. I can separate it from this folder and put it in another in another place with lots of newspaper clippings. I could also photocopy it and throw the original document out. It depends on your preference. If you are interested in storing newspaper, I wouldn't recommend storing it with everything else. My rule is if the newspaper title, this one's the Herald Citizen, which is local to this area. If I'm able to get other copies of this newspaper in its full form, I'll probably just photocopy this and throw out the actual original copy. If other copies of that newspaper are not available online, or perhaps you want to preserve the whole thing, it would probably be best to take it away from the rest of your documents. I mentioned that I have a couple of other materials sitting with me, and some of these are useful for us today, and some of them are useful, but we're not necessarily going to get into them today, but we are going to talk about them. I mentioned this brush. So if your documents have been in the closet, or they got dirt or dust, or perhaps even pests in them, it's probably best to use a nice soft brush. You don't need to have a bamboo brush like we have. You can have a regular, soft bristle brush, but kind of cleaning out the corners of your paper where folds are, or if you have pamphlets and brochures, and getting that gross stuff out of your material is going to benefit that material before you put it away, especially if you did have food crumbs or things like that in there. You're going to want to make sure all that's gone. This is a document eraser. It does not work incredibly. It's not going to work on like a coffee stain, but if you have some signs of the mold that used to be there, or just some dirt and dust, a soft brush with this eraser is actually going to help clean up your paper. It does leave a bit of a residue, so you will want to brush it off before you put your document away. And then the last thing I have here is 2 sets of gloves. And the gloves are important because we're really not going to use them. I think a lot of people, when they think about working with historic documents, they think about putting on gloves and wearing gloves. But in the case of paper documents, not photographs or photographic material, but in the case of paper documents, we want to be able to feel the document. So that way, if it's too brittle, we're going to know not to pull it too hard. We need to be able to feel it with our fingers. So in order to do that, we're going to make sure that our hands are clean and free of all oils. Make sure you don't eat a burger before you decide to mess with your archival materials. And another important detail to remember is you want to make sure your person is clean and the hands are clean. But you also want to make sure that your space is clean. And I'm working in this space right now, so there's a little bit of chaos going on. But before I put my documents out, I want to make sure it's brushed off, that the spot is clean, that I'm not going to damage my documents by just trying to work on them while I'm preserving them. So clean off your space. And also make sure that you don't have rogue things hanging around that could fall or disturb, or if your sleeve is too long, you may accidentally rip something. My problem in my house is going to be cats. In your house, maybe it's dogs or kids. And in that case, you don't want to be working on your historic document and have a pet or anything of the sort jump up and disturb your material. And the last thing with storing regular paper documents is that you do want to keep them unfolded and flat. So by flat, I mean this. So perhaps you store them like this, but you never want to store too many papers on top of each other, because what you're going to find ends up happening is it's going to be very heavy, and those bottom papers are going to feel the pressure from the top papers and will eventually wear out. What I mean by flat is you can have a couple papers flat, or you can have papers standing just like you would naturally in a filing cabinet. But the most important part is you don't want them bending this way, you don't want them bending that way, you don't want them bending any way. They're going to need to be stationary and upright. If you have materials in your collection that are in envelopes or they're folded, you are going to want to unfold them. What happens to paper as it sits folded over the course of many years is gradually the seams in the paper are going to wear away and thin. And that's especially true, and you can see in this case of this letter, which is actually from the Civil War, but it has a lot of holes in it, and that is because it was stored for many, many years in the envelope that it was sent in. So by the time we actually pulled it out, it was damaged enough that, you can see everywhere it was folded. And some of these Civil War letters are actually in 9 pieces now, rather than the original letter that they were in. And that wraps up the basic of paper preservation in archives and special collections. If you have any questions, please feel free to give us a shout at archives@tntech.edu. And thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this month's episode or edition of Archives with Atkinson.